You know, usually when we encounter a total lack of motivation, whether it's like a colleague who is constantly missing deadlines or a kid just staring blankly at their homework, our immediate, almost primal instinct is to start throwing things at the problem.
Oh, absolutely. We just throw everything at the wall to see what sticks.
Right. We throw intense praise, we throw a pep talk, or, if things get really desperate, we throw rewards. You toss a cash bonus at an underperforming team at work, or you slap a shiny sticker on a kid's chore chart.
It is the absolute default setting for human management. I mean, we rely so heavily on that classic carrot and stick routine because it just feels logical.
Yeah, it makes sense on paper.
Exactly. You tell someone to do a task they clearly have no interest in doing, and in exchange, you offer them a little treat that they do want. It treats human output as this simple, straightforward transaction.
But then you start looking into the actual psychology of motivation, and you realize that the carrot and stick approach is, well, it's often a very convincing illusion.
A total illusion.
Sure, it might force someone into, like, temporary compliance to avoid punishment or grab a quick reward, but mechanically, it completely fails to create any lasting internal drive.
Which is exactly the problem.
Right. Which is why, for this deep dive, we are unpacking the hidden mechanics of motivation. We're going to look at what is actually happening in the brain of someone who is completely checked out, how to get them re-engaged, and, how to better motivate ourselves when we hit an absolute wall.
And to get into the weeds on this, we have a really fantastic piece of source material. It's a reflection paper published in July of 2026 out of the University of West Georgia.
Yeah, written by Brown.
Right, by Brown. And it's titled Beyond Rewards. What makes this particular paper so compelling is that it doesn't just leave us stranded in dense, dry academic theory. It anchors all of this complex psychology in a highly relatable, incredibly revealing case study of a single student.
Yeah, the case study focuses on Jacob. Jacob is a second-grade summer school student, and he makes for such a fascinating figure in this analysis because he completely shatters our stereotypical image of a reluctant learner.
He really does.
Like, when you picture a checked-out student, you usually imagine a kid with their head down on the desk, hoodies pulled up, or, someone who is actively, loudly defiant.
Right, the troublemaker.
Exactly. But Jacob was incredibly talkative. He was highly imaginative. He was totally obsessed with Minecraft, always raising his hand and fully participating in classroom discussions. I mean, he was a bright, present kid.
He was completely engaged in the classroom ecosystem right up until the exact moment he was asked to write independently.
The second that happened, it was like a breaker trip.
Yeah.
He would physically shut down, stare at a blank page, and repeatedly just tell his teacher, I'm not good at writing.
Just a total wall.
Total wall. And Brown's initial response to the shutdown was what any well-meaning manager, teacher, or parent would do, right? He leaned over the desk, offered a burst of verbal encouragement, and tried to praise Jacob's past insightful comments to, pump him up.
Because we offer that verbal jolt of energy because we assume the person just needs a push.
Right, just a little nudge.
Exactly. But while that pressure might have occasionally forced Jacob into writing a single painful sentence just to get the teacher to walk away, it completely failed to address the deeper paralysis. The mechanical problem remained entirely untouched.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why does that standard upbeat verbal encouragement fail so completely in these moments? It is because the human brain isn't a vending machine.
No, it is not.
You cannot just drop a coin of encouragement into the slot and expect a completed project to pop out the bottom. Jacob's brain was doing something far more complex than just being stubborn.
Right. And Brown had a massive breakthrough when he stopped looking at Jacob's hesitation as laziness or defiance. He realized that the brain shutting down in that specific way is actually an active form of communication.
Wow.
Yeah. What we perceive as a lack of motivation is very often a highly effective protective fear response. Jacob's brain was actively routing all of its neurological energy toward protecting his ego from the terrifying prospect of making a mistake. The blank page wasn't a boring task. It was a literal threat.
A threat? That is so wild. But the moment you reframe a lack of motivation as a fear response, the entire playbook changes. You cannot cheerlead someone out of a genuine physiological threat state. Their brain simply isn't receptive to it.
Exactly. You have to diagnose the actual root of the problem. Brown realized his very first intervention couldn't be about writing at all. He had to build a relationship. He had to establish a baseline of trust before he could expect any cognitive output.
Which makes total sense.
Right, and this maps perfectly onto self-determination theory, which was developed by psychologists Richard Ryan and Edward Dacey. It's this foundational framework in psychology that argues humans are not fundamentally driven by external pressures. We are driven by three core internal needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness.
Okay, so autonomy is the need to steer your own ship, right? To feel like you have a say in your actions.
Yep.
Competence is the need to feel capable of actually doing the task. But for Jacob, that third pillar, relatedness, had to be the absolute prerequisite.
Oh, 100%.
Relatedness is that universal human need to feel connected, understood, and secure within a group or a hierarchy. If you don't feel related to the person in charge, your brain stays in a state of hypervigilance.
And a hypervigilant brain cannot learn or produce, period. So Brown shifted his entire approach. He started meeting with Jacob outside of whole group instruction, and during those moments, they completely ignored schoolwork.
They just didn't do it.
Didn't even bring it up. Brown just talked to him. He asked him about Minecraft. He talked about playing outdoors. He essentially spent time proving that Jacob was valued as a human being first, not just as a paragraph-producing machine. He was deactivating the threat response by prioritizing relatedness.
You know, it makes me think of trying to teach someone how to swim. You wouldn't just throw a terrified person into the deep end of the pool, stand safely on the dry edge, and offer them $5 if they manage to tread water.
That would be a disaster.
Right. They are way too busy fighting for their life to process your instructions on proper breathing techniques. You have to physically get into the water with them. You have to calm their nervous system and prove you aren't going to let them drown before you can even talk about moving their arms. Brown was getting in the water.
That is a great analogy. And that biological reality applies far beyond a second-grade classroom. You cannot ask a brain in a threat state to perform complex cognitive tasks, no matter the environment.
Think about how this maps onto your own life, especially in a workplace. How much easier is it for you to pitch a wild, unconventional idea in a meeting, or admit to your team that you don't know how to use a new piece of software when you know your boss genuinely has your back?
It's night and day.
Exactly. When you have that relatedness established, you aren't expending all your mental bandwidth managing the fear of being humiliated or fired. You feel safe, which frees up your cognitive energy to actually do the work.
Because safety is the foundation of the entire structure. So, through those conversations about Minecraft, trust is established, Jacob feels safe with his teacher, and the threat state is deactivated.
Okay, good.
But safety alone doesn't put words on a blank page.
Yeah.
We have to transition from establishing emotional safety to the tactical initiation of the work itself.
Because even though Jacob looks at the blank piece of paper and feels safe with Brown, he is still staring at a massive, overwhelming gap between his current skills and what the assignment demands. The safety is there, but the bridge isn't.
Right. And to build that bridge, the source material turns to a second core psychological framework, Expectancy-Value Theory, developed by Alan Wigfield and Jacqueline Eccles.
Yeah.
We will get to the value part of the equation shortly, but the expectancy half is critical here. For motivation to exist, a person must subconsciously calculate that their chance of success is greater than 0.
And when Jacob stared at a blank piece of paper and was told to write a paragraph, his internal expectancy of success was absolute 0.
Complete 0. So Brown had to help Jacob experience undeniable documented success to mathematically raise that expectancy. He used a strategy called scaffolding. Instead of demanding a finished paragraph, he broke the task down into micro steps to manage Jacob's cognitive load.
What did that look like?
So they brainstormed out loud, no writing required. Then they used graphic organizers, just filling in little boxes with single words. Brown provided explicit sentence starters so Jacob wasn't staring at a totally blank line.
The detail that really stood out to me in the source material was the use of think-alouds.
Yes, those are huge.
Brown would stand at the board and publicly model his own messy, imperfect writing process. He would vocalize his frustration. He would write a sentence, cross it out, and say out loud why it wasn't working. He was showing Jacob that wrestling with a blank page is a normal, expected part of the process, not a sign of fundamental failure.
Exactly.
Every time Jacob completed one of those tiny, heavily supported microsteps, it provided hard evidence to his brain that he was capable.
Because the brain needs that evidence to build expectancy.
Yeah.
But this specific approach, breaking things down so minutely and offering so much support, often faces a lot of cultural resistance.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, let me play devil's advocate for a second. If we are handing people graphic organizers and giving them literal sentence starters, aren't we just lowering the bar?
That's the common fear, yeah.
It feels like we are coddling them so much that they will never learn to face real adversity. If you hold someone's hand through every microstep, how do they ever learn to function independently?
It's a very common critique. but the research on cognitive load firmly rejects it. True scaffolding is never about permanently lowering expectations or removing rigor. The paper uses a perfect physical metaphor for this, the scaffolding around a skyscraper.
Okay, I like this.
Scaffolding isn't a permanent replacement for the building's structural integrity. It is the temporary metal framework that allows the construction crew to pour the concrete for the 50th floor in the first place.
Oh, wow. Right.
Without it, you can't reach the heights required to build the structure, but you don't leave it there forever. As the building, or in this case, the learner's competence gets stronger, you actively and gradually remove the metal supports until the structure stands entirely on its own.
You can't just point to the sky and demand a skyscraper without giving the workers a way to climb up there.
Precisely.
So we have trust and we have the scaffolding. Jacob uses the sentence starters, he fills out the organizers, and eventually he strings together a few really solid sentences. The paper is finished, he proved he can do it, so the problem is solved, right?
You would think so. But this is exactly where the source material takes a really fascinating turn. The twist is that a successful outcome completely failed to cure Jacob's motivational deficit.
Wait. He finally writes the paragraph, he proves to himself he can do it, and it doesn't fix the problem. Why would his brain reject its own success?
Because when he succeeded, he immediately brushed it off. He told Brown that the assignment was just easy or that he was just lucky that day.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And the very next time he faced a slightly harder independent assignment, he immediately reverted right back to his original paralysis. He shut down, repeating, "I'm not a good writer." Success alone isn't enough to build lasting motivation. What matters is how the human brain explains that success to itself.
It all comes down to the internal narrative.
Yes, and that narrative is governed by Causal Attribution Theory, pioneered by psychologist Bernard Wiener. This theory categorizes how we explain the causes of the outcomes in our lives. We generally categorize these causes along a couple of dimensions, whether the cause is internal or external, and whether it is fixed or controllable.
Right. So if you attribute your success to an uncontrollable external factor like luck or an overly easy assignment, it completely shatters your resilience.
Totally.
Because the moment things get hard again, your brain knows it cannot rely on luck to save you. Conversely, if you attribute your failure to a fixed internal trait like telling yourself, "I'm just not smart enough to do this," you also have zero resilience. You believe you are fundamentally flawed, so any effort feels pointless.
The way we categorize our wins and losses literally determines our future motivation.
Here is where it gets really interesting for me. It is exactly like fighting a notoriously difficult boss in a video game.
Okay, I'm with you.
If you are playing a brutal game and you finally beat the hardest level, but your internal narrative is, "Wow, the game glitched, the boss froze, and I got incredibly lucky," your expectancy of success for the next level drops to zero.
Right, because you didn't earn it.
Exactly. You feel a sense of dread because you didn't actually own that win. The outcome was external and uncontrollable. But if you beat that exact same boss because you spend an hour studying its attack patterns and you finally timed your dodges perfectly through pure effort and strategy, your entire physiology changes.
They feel unstoppable.
Yes, you feel a rush of adrenaline. You are energized and ready for the next challenge because you attribute the success to a controllable internal strategy.
Because effort and strategy are variables that you have complete control over. Recognizing this mechanism, Brown realized he had to overhaul how he offered praise. Instead of praising the final written product or telling Jacob he was so smart, Brown started asking highly specific, process-oriented questions.
Like what?
He would ask, "What strategy helped you the most today?"
He was forcing Jacob's brain to attribute the success to his own controllable action.
Exactly. And when Jacob made a mistake, it was no longer treated as proof of a fixed character flaw. It was neutralized into mere data. Brown would reframe the mistake by saying, "You just used the wrong tool for the job. Let's try a different strategy next time."
That is so smart.
It completely removes the emotional sting of failure.
Right.
It shifts the brain's focus away from a threat state and toward tactical actions that the learner controls.
So we have built a pretty incredible foundation for Jacob. We have relatedness and trust, so his nervous system is calm. We have scaffolding, which bridged the cognitive gap and built his expectancy of success. And Brown has rewired his causal attributions, giving him a resilient internal narrative. He knows he is capable, and he knows how to use strategies to succeed.
All the pieces seem to be there.
But there is still one glaring piece missing from this equation. Why should Jacob actually want to write in the first place?
Which brings us back to the second half of expectancy-value theory.
Hmm.
Motivation is not an addition problem, it is a multiplication problem. Motivation equals expectancy multiplied by value. We fix the expectancy half. Jacob now mathematically believes he can write. But if his subjective value of writing is 0, then a high expectancy multiplied by 0 still equals 0 motivation.
A great way to conceptualize this missing value is to think about doing your taxes on a beautiful Saturday afternoon.
The worst.
Right. Imagine you are a high-level financial expert. You have a 100% expectancy of success when it comes to filling out complex tax forms. You have all the scaffolding, you know all the strategies, but your motivation to sit inside and do your taxes on a gorgeous weekend is absolute 0.
Because it's awful.
Because the task lacks any intrinsic personal meaning. It is a pure, tedious compliance task designed to avoid an audit.
And writing a paragraph was Jacob's Saturday tax form. It was an arbitrary compliance task demanded by an authority figure in exchange for a grade. Yeah. You cannot look a 7-year-old in the eye and tell them that learning to write a coherent thesis statement is deeply valuable for their future corporate career.
No, they don't care about that at all.
They don't. The value has to be immediate and it has to be personal.
So Brown leveraged the data he gathered during the trust-building phase to inject personal value into the task. To fulfill Jacob's need for autonomy, he gave him choices about what to write, and he tailored those writing prompts directly to Jacob's passions. He had him write survival strategies for Minecraft.
Which is brilliant, but the most impactful, transformative strategic move Brown made was introducing a concept he called the author's chair.
I loved this part. The author's chair was brilliant. By setting up a dedicated space at the front of the room where a student could sit and read their finished writing aloud to their peers, Brown completely removed the teacher from the equation. He changed the fundamental objective of the task.
Yes, writing stopped being a transactional compliance task for an adult's approval. Sitting in that chair turned writing into an authentic vehicle for social connection. Jacob was suddenly sharing his deep knowledge about a game he loved with an audience of peers who genuinely cared about the information. For a young student, peer validation carries vastly more intrinsic value than a grade on a piece of paper.
It really highlights that motivation is a delicate ecosystem. You cannot just fix the value part and ignore the safety part. If the scaffolding is missing, the entire structure collapses under its own weight. We have essentially deconstructed the entire concept of being unmotivated. We've seen that motivation is not a fixed personality trait.
No, it's not.
It is certainly not a symptom of fundamental laziness, and it is definitely not a magical substance you can just inject into someone via a loud pep talk or a shiny financial reward.
It is an ecosystem that must be actively cultivated. You have to establish the trust required to calm the nervous system. You must provide the temporary structural support to bridge the gap between current ability and high expectations. You have to train the brain to view success as a result of controllable strategy and failure as neutral data. And finally, you have to connect the difficult work to something intrinsically meaningful to the individual.
And the beauty of this framework is that these are universal laws of human psychology. These pillars scale infinitely. They apply just as much to a project manager trying to revive a checked-out corporate team or an adult feeling totally paralyzed by learning a frustrating new hobby as they do to a second grader in summer school.
Because they govern the fundamental mechanics of how the human brain calculates the decision to try.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over on your own. Throughout this entire discussion, we have applied this psychological framework to concrete, academic, or professional tasks. You know, writing a paragraph, finishing a spreadsheet, learning a skill. But what happens if you apply this exact same framework to abstract, emotional tasks?